Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
It must have been 20 years ago when a like-minded music fan handed me a cassette tape and introduced me to the band, the Red Guitars, and the album Slow to Fade. The band recently embarked on a short UK tour and joined me today to share that experience. The band was originally formed in Hull around 1982 by lead singer Jerry Kidd and guitarist Hallam Lewis. Playing a mix of punk, blues, electrified folk and African rhythms, the band built a loyal following after the release of their debut single, Good Technology. Constant touring followed, and the band went on to support the Smiths. They also received high praise from John Peel, featured on his radio sessions, and the Good Technology music video was broadcast on Channel 4's The Tube. The group released their debut album, Slow to Fade, in 1984, which reached number 3 in the indie chart, received critical acclaim. After the departure of Jerry Kidd in 1984, the band signed to Virgin Records with new singer Robert Holmes. The album Tales of the Expected, released in 1986. The band decided to disband that same year, with members going on to other musical endeavors. However, their music was kept alive through Jerry Kidd's website, the CD release of their back catalogue, YouTube videos, and band reunions in 1998, 2006, and of course earlier this year. Today I'm joined by the Red Guitars, Jerry Kidd, Matt Higgins, Lou Duffy Howard, Hallam Lewis, who's somewhere, but we'll explain in a minute, and John Rowley. We talk about the band's formation, how they met one another, the albums, John Peel and television exposure, splitting in 1986, what happened after the split, and their recent reunion tour. A very warm welcome to the Red Guitars.
Hello.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you for joining me this evening on Your Take to specifically talk about your musical journeys, how you all met one another, and the great news of you reforming earlier this year, which we'll go on and talk about later in the narrative. We probably should explain that lead guitarist Hallam Lewis sadly can't join us this evening. He's somewhere. I don't know if anyone would kind of like to explain the issue.
Yeah, I will do if you like. Well, Hallam doesn't live in the UK. Hallam lives in Cape Town in South Africa. And sometimes, quite often, I think, they have planned and unplanned power outages. So the electricity and whatever else gets cut off, I think, for several hours at a time. And I think that's what's happened tonight, James. So that happens, I think, with fairly, it's fairly regular down there. So Hallam, we'll give our apologies on his behalf that he can't make it tonight, and he's probably sitting in darkness somewhere. But he's here in spirit.
He is in spirit indeed. Yeah. Before we talk about the music and the band and all the things you've done and achieved, can we go back to the very beginning? And this is a question for you all. Can I ask you all when and where you were born? And can you just give us some background on your parents, what they did for a living? And do you have any siblings?
I'll kick off. I was born in Devonport, excuse me, in New Zealand, which is just across the water from Auckland. My dad was a traveling salesman, worked for an American company selling wind cheaters mostly, I think. And my mum was a nurse. I've got one brother, or I had a brother, an older brother, Dennis. He died in 2006.
Lou, I wanted to ask you the same question and just ask just a bit of background on your childhood and
Yeah.
you,
Okay. Well, I was born in Manchester and lived there as a child. My parents, well, my dad was also a travelling salesman. I didn't know that Jerry's was, but he sold sweets. So I had a lot of sweets as a child, and it was great going to work with my dad. I've got twin brothers, identical twin brothers. And my family sort of music story is not very rock and roll, really, because my mum's family were classical musicians. My mum founded an Elizabethan group of playing Elizabethan music. And my dad was not a musician, but he liked to listen to opera, so not so rock and roll, but my family were musical, I guess, in a different way. Yeah.
same question again to Matt. Just want to find out some background on your upbringing, your parents, and obviously in a minute we'll come on to the early musical influences.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was born in Leeds, which is where I currently am speaking to you tonight. And I grew up with three brothers. I've got two older brothers and one younger one. And I suppose my dad ran a textile mill in between Leeds and Bradford. And mum was a teacher. I suppose the musical side of things, well, clearly that rules me out because I play the drums, which is one that Mr. Rowley particularly likes to remind me about. But I do come from quite a musical family, but not, well, actually, yeah, my younger brother's classically trained, but he's also played in a lot of bands. And one of my older brothers he was originally a pianist, but he kind of is a good guitarist now as well. So we grew up with music, a bit like Luke said about her dad. My dad wasn't really musical, but he liked listening to it, like listen to all sorts of music. So yeah, it was always music around. I took up the drums because everybody at school wanted to play the guitar. So even if you were crap drummer, it didn't really matter, because if you had one or two drums, you were always going to be in a band because nobody else really played or wanted to play. So that was an advantage from about the age of 12 or 13, I suppose.
And then finally, John, same question to you. I wanted to find out when and where you were born and just a bit of background on your parents.
Well, very humble origins. I was born in Eastwood, which is a mining town in Notts Derby coalfield. My entire family were miners, granddads and uncles, everybody. The Rowleys dig coal, that's what we do. And I kind of... we had no musical aspirations. My dad sang in pubs. That was music. I don't know if I ever had, I never had any training at all. When Jerry and I first formed the original band, I couldn't play a note. It's arguable that I haven't progressed that much since then. But I seriously hadn't. The only reason that we decided to form a band in 1978 was because everybody did, and it was cool, and some deluded girl may sleep with you. It's like, but as far as musical aspirations go, I didn't know I had no musical training whatsoever.
A background on your family lives and a depiction on your parents as well. I wanted to move on and tap onto music, and a question for you all again. do you all come from musical backgrounds, but specifically wanted to ask what music was being played around the family house and what music went on to inspire you all and decided you to choose music as a career option? And yeah, I was going to direct that question to start with to Lou.
Oh, okay, so, well, I didn't really study music at school. I suppose I felt a bit more of a black sheep of the family, really, because my family were into classical music, and, you know, my brothers sang in the anthems at the church choir, and I just didn't really do any of that. But when I got a little bit older, in my kind of mid to late teens, I started going to see bands, and just the different world opened up to me. So when I was at school, I went to see, well, the first band that I went to see was David Bowie on the Ziggy Stardust tour. When I was 13, me and my friend Julie went to Leeds Roll Arena, and that just blew my mind, Mick Ronson playing guitar. And from then on, yeah, I wanted to be in a band, really. So I don't know why bass, I just got hold of a bass, and that was the instrument that I played.
From Lou, seeing David Bowie in the early days and that being an incredible influence on you, we move on to Jerry. I wanted to ask the same question and find out what music was being played in the family household, but was there a specific band or an artist that really made an impact on you at a young age, and why?
Yeah, the Beatles. They just completely changed the world that I was living in. I thought they were amazing, and they just seemed to alter a whole perspective on the world. Up to that point, the fact there wasn't a lot of music played at home. I lived with my grandparents when I first came to England, and they had records like Fiddler on the Roof and Stagecoach, things like that. I remember when I was very young, I had a birthday party, and my favourite record at the time was the Dam Busters March, which had on a shellac, an old shellac disc, which I dropped on the morning of my birthday party. I was very upset, but I discovered that I could reassemble the broken record on the turntable and it would still play. So then the big influence, apart from the Beatles, which was massive, was my brother. He was particularly into the Byrds and Buddy Holly, quite like American music, and he tended to prefer the Stones, of course. So we had that natural kind of dichotomy going on between us. And yeah, that's it, really.
Jerry's mentioned the impact of the Fab Four, who made such an incredible impact pretty much on all musicians. And interesting to hear the Byrds be mentioned, because they were a band that had an impact on me when I was about 16, particularly when they went very country. Move on to John now. Wanted to talk about the music that you were listening to in the family home. Was it music that you liked, or was it music that you wanted to particularly rebel against? And who were the musical influences for you?
I don't know, really. I think it was very Catholic music back in the 50s and 60s. You know, you turn the radio on and there'd be light opera, Buddy Holly, Elvis, and some kind of comedy thing. It was a broad church. The music that came through popular, you know, none of my family had rare releases or collected music. They, you know, as I say, my dad was a pub singer. I loved the Mills Brothers and the Ink Spots, those kind of close harmony things. But no, not really. I mean, music was all around, but then it just happened to coincide with my age, really. both, well, all of us really, but more probably to me because I'm older, there was a huge social and cultural revolution around music. Music was the vanguard of post-war youth rebellion, everything. You know, it just became a badge, starting with the 50s rockabilly and rock and roll, and then coming through into, you know, protest music and the civil rights stuff. I mean, it was a very, very important part of a young person's life, and you had to wear your badge accordingly. You know, I didn't particularly like the Beatles. I was a Rolling Stones guy, you know, because they were naughty, and you know, it just, I'd never seen anything like it, you know. And then the thing that I think really convinced me that this was something else was seeing, you know, Jimi Hendrix on the TV for the first time, doing sort of Hey Joe, and then Purple Haze and The Wind Cries Mary and All Along the Watchtower, blah blah. I went and bought all those records, and from then on, that was me. I never considered that I would be a guitarist. I never had any lessons. I just loved music. I just thought it was vital and exciting.
Come on now to the drummer's perspective. Matt, can you remember your first discovery of music, and was there any bands or any artists that struck a chord from an early age and made you want to pursue a career as a drummer or be in a band?
I suppose there's a slight difference to what I first listened to and then what made me want to perhaps play the drums. So the early, I mean, I was very influenced by, because I had two older brothers, so I was very influenced by them, and you know, so yeah, they were massive Beatles fans, and I remember listening, you know, to the White Album early on, which I think was probably released in, I think it was probably about 1968 or something.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, and that was, I just thought that was great, because it was, every song was completely different.
Yeah.
There was such a difference of material in that. But in terms of playing the drums, it was, well, yeah, it was probably getting into Led Zeppelin and John Bonham, who I loved. I wasn't a massive fan of the Stones, but I was always a fan of Charlie Watts, because I just think he was brilliant, because he was so solid, and he wasn't particularly frilly. I'm not a massive, well, John Bonham, I suppose, could be frilly, but he was just a really good, just fantastic rhythms. And I wasn't really a big fan of the likes of Keith Moon, particularly, because he was so frilly. You know, he didn't, and it was fine, you know, and you know, he was character and everything, but I'm much more a fan of drummers, because I can't do the frilly stuff anyway. So just trying to keep a beat and keep in time is enough for me, and that's what I think drummers are for, really. In bands, that they, you know, they're kind of there to provide the backbeat. I think that, you know, that's the drums and the bass for me. But the drums are about keeping the beat, and I think I prefer it quite simple. But playing simply is quite difficult a lot of the time.
Mm.
You know.
I wanted to move on and go to the first chapter of you as a group forming, and this was a question for Jerry. Hallam Lewis and yourself met in 1979 at a community arts program in Hull. Can you tell us about your initial meeting and becoming close friends? And can you discuss your early music endeavours, which included the formation of the bands Carnage and the Eastern European reggae band, the Czechs?
Yeah, it was the Outreach Community Arts Centre,
I'm just going.
and he's off.
Come on, I've got a dog here that wants feeding. Come on.
And Hallam and I were sent there as, well, I think we were both on the dole, and it was kind of like it was like an option to earn a bit of money. So we met and we formed a trio with another arts worker called Hugh Whitaker, who eventually went on to be the drummer in the House Martins. And we went, and we didn't do this terribly frequently, but we went to care homes, old people's homes, and performed songs like On the Trail of the Lonesome Pine and Don't Bring Lulu, for example. Hugh and I sang, and Hallam played the guitar, and I don't know, I don't think, well, I don't know. It was a farce, really, but there you go. Something, and we also did a couple of workshops in community centres for young people on songwriting. We began to work together at that stage, but the first band I formed, Hal wasn't in it, or the first band I was involved with, I didn't form it. It was a lecturer in the English department at Hull University called Bruce Woodcock, and John Rowley was involved, and also a poet called Sean O'Brien, who figures quite large in our story. And we were called Jerry and the Schweinhunds to begin with. I think we played one gig up at the university, but it was just in it wasn't in a major hall or anything. And then we reformed a bit later as the Hitmen. Again, myself, John Rowley, Sean O'Brien, Bruce, I think, Phil Abramson, and we weren't really looking at having a career in music, as John's already alluded to. It was just like fun thing to do, you know, and yeah, it was great. We really enjoyed it. And eventually, and then I formed another group with Stuart Ross, who again features quite large in the Red Guitar story because he penned Good Technology. That group was called the Arctic Rangers, and I think that was in 1980. And we performed a bit. Stuart was the rhythm guitarist. A guy called Dave Watt was lead guitarist. Sean on drums. And at one gig that we played, we had two guest saxophone players. That was Hallam Lewis and Roland Gift. So, and it was reviewed in a local fanzine, and the sax players didn't get a terribly good write-up, I have to say.
Wow.
And then after that, we formed Carnage in Poland, not just called Carnage, we were Carnage in Poland. And that was the first group with Hallam in as guitar player. And then finally, the Czechs, where it was Hal, myself, and Matt came in and replaced Sean O'Brien, thank God. Although Sean used to turn up occasionally and play timbales. And Lou came in and she replaced our Jamaican bass player, who was called Mark Douglas. And that was why we, you know, because that's why we got the name, or we coined the idea of Eastern European reggae, because we had a Jamaican bass player and we were called the Czechs. And that's the story, really. Then after that, we changed the name from the Czechs because there was another group called the Czechs, and we decided to call ourselves Red Guitars after many pints of beer in I can't remember which pub it was.
Station.
Probably the station, wasn't
The
it?
station.
Oh, mostly the station, and well, yeah, actually quite a few different pubs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we came up with the name the Red Guitars, and it turned out, of course, there was another group called the Red Guitars, who, funnily enough, were based in Brighton, which is where I now live. But we completely decimated them, and they had to give up they had to change their name.
They changed it to U2.
Good answer. I was going to direct this next question to Hallam, but obviously, sadly, he can't be here this evening. So I'm going to open this up to the floor. From those early musical foundations and experiences, how did the Red Guitars form? And can you discuss specifically the musical style? Because so many interesting things going on in regard to the music, the band infusing punk, blues, electrified folk. And can you also share with us this love of African music?
I think without Hallam Lewis, there isn't really Red Guitars. I mean, there'll be some form of, we were in a different band every week for a while, but it was just, I went away. I disappeared for 6 months. I went off to South America, and when I came back, I went to see them, and there was this guy, who could actually play guitar, like not just like all the rest of us, just a few chords and a stab at it, but could really play the guitar, and it was just like thrilling to watch for me. I kind of came back and blagged my way back into the band, because I just thought this is something that could actually happen. It's pretty obvious to me that it was a step above everything that had gone before it, and it was because Hallam is such a fantastic creative guitarist. He's one of the best guitarists probably in the world. I mean, I've been fortunate. I think we've all been fortunate to have worked with somebody as creative as that. It's exciting. It makes things happen that just never happened in other bands. He's got it, whatever it is. I haven't got it, but he has. And that's fine. He just elevated. He just took it to the next level.
Yeah, I could like to just add to that as well. Hallam grew up in South Africa, where his influences were lots of music from the Soweto, the townships, the sort of music that we'd just never heard here. This was before the internet. Right. Yeah. You couldn't click on a button and listen to music from across the world, and it was before it. I mean, Paul Simon made a lot of that, public, but it was years before then. It was maybe 7 years before that Hallam and the Red Guitars got together, and his playing was absolutely amazing. And I've, just like John says, I've learned so much about playing the bass from listening from Hal playing the guitar. It was I just feel like I was really lucky in the years later that we've been we've been apart and done separate music. It's just, I've realized how just absolutely entrenched Hallam's playing is in my playing, and the way that I play. And I think, just what John says is absolutely right. So he's not here, we can talk about him, Hallam, but
listening to stuff now, the new material, there's the basis of a new album on the cards now. We've kind of listened to it, and he will ask me, as he always does, he'll say, just play this, and then I can play. And that was been my role all the time, to kind of just put something of a skeleton on so that he can then do something incredibly creative. But he'll say, just play this, and I'll go, oh my God, I would never ever have thought of doing it like that. It's just something in him. He's so rhythmic with his guitar playing, and that, I think that is a really crucial bit. It's a loads of multi-polyrhythms in what he does. He throws rhythmical things at you that you'd never even think of. I wouldn't. I'm not.
But also in his note choices, he goes out of his way to make sure his note choices are different. You know, everything's different
all the time. All the time. And the other thing is, you know, as a band coming through, the fundamental musical backbone to rock music is the pentatonic blues scale. That's rock. Hallam has never played. Well, you know, he can. He's fantastic at it, but he just veers away from it. He won't. There's never been that in the Red Guitars. You know, in the music that we've chosen to take forward and work on. We've never done that, and that's always been surprising for me. And there's as a very simple guitar player, there's a tendency to just go, oh well, I can play that there. That's the blues scale, and he'll go, no, don't play that. Play this, and you go, holy shit, I can't play that. But then you do learn how to play it. And he, like Lou, he teaches you to listen to it in a different way. He's a very, very talented guitarist.
It's really interesting, this influence, because Lou's right. This becomes at least about 7-8 years before Paul Simon's Graceland album, which was a complete smash and a hugely successful album. But I think the other interesting thing is, if we look back at the 80s, there was no other bands that really kind of had this sound and this influence. You were doing something that was very unique at the time and very distinctive.
I think there's another reason for that. I do think that coming from Hull, where we were all living, it's, you know, it is a bit on the edge. It's not a place where people go through, and the influence of that on people in all creative mediums, you know, including music. People aren't here, you know, we weren't just doing what was popular. We were doing something that was regardless of what was popular at the time. It has nothing to do with what might be the next big thing or whatever people were hearing in the clubs in London and Manchester. It was totally just what was coming out from us, not influenced by what we thought might be popular. I think that's something to do with Hull and people in Hull as well.
It was tested. I mean, it was tested out. The songs were tested, like live tested, over hundreds of gigs. We used to play every weekend, sometimes twice, and you know, you had a song idea, and you kind of kept beating it with a stick until you started to get feedback from the audience, and then you go, oh yeah, this is really working now. And so all these songs were run. There's this thing now, you know, that technology, good technology, the curse of it has enabled people to kind of put a song together very quickly and say, oh, there you go, that's a song, you know, and I'll go and record that. Well, it was a different game then. You had to go and present completely original material to people who'd never heard it before and make them like it. And that's really, there's a lot of craft in that, to be able to write and perform songs like that. So yeah,
I'll say an example of that in practice. So I remember going up to the university one dinner time to play a gig in a bar there, and we were working on Steel Town. It was a new song. It wasn't, I don't even know if it was called Steel Town then, but it was the riff, and we started playing the riff, and we just didn't know how to stop, because it kind of you know, it carries on at the end of the riff. One of us it's like a round, isn't it? One of us started. We were just like looking at each other going, how can we stop? So we played it for a long time.
Yeah.
Matt, I want to cast the clock back 4 decades to the early 80s. I want to specifically pick up on what Lou was saying and pick up on Hull as a city. Can you describe the cultural and music scene in Hull in the early 80s? what bands were on the scene at that time? What venues were you playing at? And can you describe your fan base at the time? Because I get this impression that almost from the word go, you had a very loyal fan base that's stuck 40 years later when we pick up on your reunion tour.
I think we have. I mean, when we played these gigs earlier this year, that was very apparent, because I mean, they were varied, the audience sizes varied, but when we played, particularly I think when we played in Glasgow and Hull, of course, but there were people who, there were people who were sort of, sort of our age, some a bit younger, some a bit older, who had, they knew everything about us, and they knew all the songs, and and it's great, that people follow you through that long, and were, delighted to come along. I think Hull was, well, I mean, I went as a student in I went to Hull in 1980, and I remember, first, because I had a brother there who was I was in my first year, my brother was in his final year, and that's why I got to know, first Hallam, I suppose, and so I didn't, when I got into playing in bands, or in this particular band, I suppose it was because I wasn't, I wasn't living the sort of standard student life. I got into the town or the city quite early through, these guys. And it was great. I mean, there were we used to run, primarily Jerry and I guess, we used to run a rehearsal room down in the old fruit market, which was down near the pier, the docks. And there were loads of different bands coming in, lots and lots of different bands. I remember, some of the names I remember a band called Niam, which I think John became part of later. I remember a band called Cold Dance.
Yeah. The Luddites were
Luddites. And then there was a band who I think were from Brid, called International Rescue.
Yeah.
And they were on the Tube. They were one of the 4 sort of local bands that were featured on that show on the Tube that we did. I loved it. I loved Hull. I loved Hull. Still, I still love going back, because it is very different. Like Lou said, it's kind of cut off, but there was a massive, I don't know, I don't really know, because I'm not there that much, whether the music scene is as vibrant, but there seemed to be loads of bands. And the venues there then, I don't think it was the Adelphi, it was the Welly Club, the Wellington Club. It was
House, which is the old community centre,
and the Welly Lane Community Centre, which was just like that. I don't think it's there anymore.
No,
it was just a corrugated building, I think, and we used to play there probably virtually every weekend, always for Socialist Workers' Party. There was so much.
Trades and Labour Club, miners' benefits.
We did a great gig at we did a great gig for the miners' benefit gig at the miners' place. So there were, I suppose we played the same relative small number of places, but a hell of a lot. And that's how, like John was saying, that's how we built up the sort of following and got people into the songs. And that was why when we went to record the first album in Fairview, which was just outside Hull, that's why I think that recording, those sessions were so good, because we knew the song. We changed things, but we knew the songs back to front by then. So we were going in and we were, we had a good idea, I think, of what we're doing. We hadn't done lots and lots of recording before that, but we'd done lots and lots of playing. And I think that set the tone for recording that album. And that's why I personally think it was such a good album, and still is. And I spent, I lived in Hull for about 7 or 8 years, I suppose. And it was a great place to live, but it was sort of different from other parts of the country to some extent, I think. And it's a shame, because it's not an affluent city, not by any stretch. And of course, there's no fishing industry or anything, virtually none left there now. So it's You know, it's not a city. It's you don't. I don't think you live in Hull because it's, you know, for affluence or anything like that. But it's quite, you know, you knew a lot of people. You know, you knew a lot of people, and it was. I think it was very, very friendly. I think people felt a little bit perhaps ostracized or ignored by a lot of the rest of the country. But what did they do to counter that? Well, just, like the others have said, they just did their own thing, you know, and that's why a lot of the music I thought was really different, and it wasn't mainstream, but it was interesting. You know, some of it was great, some of it was probably pretty crap, but it was basically usually had some interest. People were doing things a bit differently, you know.
That's a tradition that's been, you know, I mean, things like Spring Street Theatre, you know, a truly revolutionary independent theatre company. All the poets, Douglas Dunn and Sean O'Brien, lots of artists, Kevin Storch and there was a lot of artistic stuff going on there, which was basically putting a finger up to the mainstream and going, this is how we do it, you know, we're gonna do that. And I think that fed into the music scene as well. I mean, people like Roland Gift, you know, and the Acrylic Victims, and then of course he became, you know, super famous with Fine Young Cannibals, but he was just ploughing his own little furrow there way before any of that, you know, and again doing what we did, just playing all the time, and he just had a fantastic following in Hull, and so, you know, good on him. Yeah, and very different. Yeah,
I wanted to pick up on
I just butt in a moment and say I just recently was thinking looking at some work by Philip Larkin, and became aware of the fact that the Marvell Press, who published Philip Larkin's first book of poems, The Less Deceived, was an independent Hull publisher. Just, you know, a guy, a couple in a terraced house in Hull putting out a book by the man who became the most famous British poet of the 20th century.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, we sort of followed slightly. I don't want to make too much of it, but you know, we did try and start our own label and you know, publish our own material and put out our own stuff in the spirit of perhaps of the Marvel Press.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Matt's just said. You mentioned Hull not being a particularly affluent city, and back in those days, I'd imagine a very industrial one. And we're at the beginning of Margaret Thatcher's time in office. I wanted to ask about your politics. Were you politically very aware people? Because a lot of the early songs kind of struck a chord in terms of making political statements. Steel Town, for example, Good Technology, about the advancement of technology almost making man or women's jobs redundant. Would you say that you were kind of politically active figures in those days or even before?
Well,
That's,
yeah. I you know, you grow up. I don't know. It's very difficult to make generalizations. Where I grew up, you know, was a mining area, and so when Thatcher came along, it, you know, it's just like, you know, men worked in dangerous jobs. There were trade unions. People were on the left. They were working class people, and yeah, I mean, it was a, you know, you had that kind of, I don't know, feeling for it. I wasn't particularly overtly left wing. I've become more and more so since those days, to the point, yeah, where it's a bit loony now. But you know, that's how I feel about it. But I mean, Matt was involved in Socialist Workers' Party, yeah.
Yeah, and it was. I think, yeah. I mean, you know, I come from a pretty comfortable middle class background, but I think we were. Yeah, I think we were. I wouldn't say we were sort of preachy or ramming it down people's throats, but certainly I think a lot of our songs had a left. Yeah, because. I think, you know, a lot of people in a city like Hull were just, you know, they were just ignored, really. Like a lot of other sort of communities up and down Britain. Everything was central, as it still is, really, around, you know, London and the Westminster. And I think we were pretty principled. I think we still are, actually.
I think all of us, you know, we're all firmly left-wing, basically, I would say that.
And you won't find any, you know, you won't find many Liz Truss fans in the country now, but you certainly wouldn't find and you certainly wouldn't find, you know, what's going on at the moment, because I think it's just become a complete farce. And I think it's actually probably, you know, John said he's more left-leaning now. I think probably most of us are. And I think that's because of what we've seen play out in the last 40 years, probably since Margaret Thatcher came to power. So I think we're pretty unashamed about that. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. I'm woke, evidently.
I first went to
Hull. Oh yeah, we're woke. Yeah.
Evidently, I'm woke.
Here we are. Yeah.
Snowflakes
or whatever it is.
No, I'm a snowflake. Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but yeah.
No, I don't. Well, it's anybody with a sense of fairness and justice. I don't know. Yeah.
Jerry, I want to pick up on the band's debut album. What are your recollections of recording the album Slow to Fade? And what are your memories of the early tours and supporting the Smiths and also appearing on John Peel's radio sessions?
Well, as I was mentioning before, we really got into this for a bit of a laugh, you know. I mean, we were pretty serious about trying to write good songs and perform them the best we could, but we became kind of big fish in a small pond. It was Hull. And I remember the first time we got an out-of-town gig, it was in York at a pub. And we thought that was fantastic, you know. And then things just kind of escalated. When we released Good Technology, suddenly loads of doors opened. As I understand it, Johnny Marr heard that record and he liked it. And the Smiths were just starting, so they invited us to tour with them. In those days, most support bands on tour with a major act would have to buy onto the tour. We didn't have to do any of that. And then we got onto the university circuit. We were going around the country playing loads of gigs, and it was fantastic. You know, by that we were a bit hit and miss to start with as a live act, but obviously as time went by, we improved, and I think we became competent, and you know, we seemed to go down quite well. The Smiths thing was a big boost. We fortuitously got onto the Tube when I took Good Technology, the single, into Radio Humberside to give to a DJ who I thought would play it, and he just happened to be in a meeting with a guy from the Tube. I was introduced to him. Next thing you know, we did a video for the Tube. And, you know, the whole thing then just kind of took off. And I think it took all of us by surprise. It was obviously very welcome. And I think we all really enjoyed it. It was great fun, you know, and it was way beyond what our expectations had been, I think. So, yeah, that's it.
Before I move on to the next question for Jerry, I wanted to ask you all about your recollections of the recording of the debut album. Was it kind of a smooth, organic process? what are your memories when you look back at the recording sessions and also the finished album?
Well, it was good. It was a big learning process for us all, I think, as well. It certainly was for me. I mean, we'd done some recording before, but not a lot. It was really exciting. I remember mixing some of the songs at the end of, just wow, the analog mixing desk where everybody had control of maybe a couple of faders, and we're moving up and down the guitars, the vocals, the various different parts. And have we got a take? If somebody make a mistake, whoa, I missed my cue, I had to start again. Remember doing this, remember Within Four Walls, sticks so in my mind. It was so amazing when we were mixing it. I was doing the railway sleeper, ching, ching, ching. But we got to the end of that mix. Wow, everybody knew it was great. It was just such vibe, such clear memories of that creativity just coming to fruition. Great memories.
It was also we was the first time we'd encountered someone who wanted to push us a lot harder than we had pushed ourselves, in that the engineer stroke producer, Roy, had recorded a lot of bands of quality over the years, and made us realize that it had to be done in a particular way. You had to be on the money timing wise. Your instruments had to be totally in tune, and the intonation right across the neck. The drums had to be tuned dead right to the, and we were like, oh, this was all new. This was a completely new thing. And I think we struggled with it at first. We would go, that was great. And he'd go, no, it wasn't. It was shit. It's like, oh, it's just like, well, what do we do? Well, you do it again and you do it right. And it took us a bit to get over that, but I think it really helped us as a band to suddenly realize that there was something else that you could bring to the party that really gave you like a professional edge and a sound and things like that. I think basically we were pretty sloppy when we went in, and we were pretty tight by the end of it, so yeah, I think we gained from that a lot.
And then lastly, Matt, receiving this endorsement by John Peel, that must have been a great feeling at the time, and also recording some live sessions. What are your memories from those experiences?
Yeah, I remember hearing it. I was around at Jerry's house the night that we first heard John Peel play Good Technology, and I rang up and I got through to him, between records, and I said, "Oh, John, it's brilliant. Yeah, can we do a session? Yeah." And he sort of, he said, "Well, probably work something out." He was kind of a little bit non-committal, but he was also, positive. Recording the sessions, it's a different discipline from recording an album or whatever, because you only have a certain amount of time. So I think we probably had something like 5 or 6 hours at Maida Vale. I think all the ones we did were at Maida Vale in West London, and I think we usually had 4 songs to do, and so basically you would certainly do the drums. You record the backing tracks pretty much live, and then you would do some overdubs, but not a huge number. The first guy who produced a session was a guy called Dale Griffin, who was the drummer. He was the drummer in Mott the Hoople, and he at first he wasn't a very happy guy. He obviously thought probably, why am I doing this and what am I doing this for? But to be fair to him, once I think he listened to us a bit, and I think he realised we could play a bit, he then got a bit more into it, But it was, I think we did probably maybe two John Peels. We did them for Kid Jensen, we did them for Janice Long, did them for, I'm not sure if we did, was it Simon Mayo or Nicky Campbell? I can't remember. So we did quite a few in the end, and but it was good. It was great because you had to just go in and get on with it. You didn't have the luxury of taking, a day. Well, probably what we did in Fairview when we recorded the album, which was probably a day a track or something, maybe even more. And certainly not when we went to record the second album. But that's another story. The discipline of it was great. And it was pretty much state of the art. I remember you couldn't move a mic or anything without a techie guy, a union guy had to come in if you wanted a mic shifted and something like that. Otherwise, you were kind of breaking the rules. But I remember it as a really positive experience, and the fact that you had to be pretty much on the money, because if you weren't, you had a certain time to do it, and if you didn't finish it, well, it was sort of tough, really. Just put it on in the state that it was finished in at that particular day. It was great. They were really good.
The question now for Jerry. Incredibly, you record at Maida Vale, which has so much history attached to the place. The Beatles did many sessions there, and just so much history. Great producers involved. It's such a beautiful building as well. You mentioned the radio sessions. We've mentioned the debut album. What made you decide to leave the band in 1984, only 2 months after the release of Slow to Fade? And what did you do after the departure of the band? And in hindsight, looking back 40 years, 40 years on, do you have any regrets that you made that decision?
Well, the first thing I need to mention is that we never could have made the album without the support of Tony Kaye and Red Rhino Records in York. They put up all the money for us to record that album. They had come in, we initially released Good Technology on our own Self-Drive label. And then we managed to persuade Tony and his crew over in York to take us on and distribute us through the cartel of independent record labels, the main one of which was Rough Trade. And our singles did well enough for him to have the and also he made some money out of some pretty dodgy records. Anyway, he was good enough to put up the money to record the album, and without his support, sadly he passed away a number of years ago now, but without his support we never would have made that album. So thumbs up to Tony Kaye.
Definitely, yeah.
He's a great guy. As regarding leaving the band, the situation was that I had two young kids, aged 3 and 5 in 1984. My marriage was rocky, to say the least, and there were a lot of factors involved in that, one of which was being in the band. When my parents split up when I was 3 years old, and I grew up without a father, and I didn't want my kids to have to grow up in a single parent environment. So although it was a really tough decision, I decided that the kids came first, and so I left the band. It was a sad moment, and I don't regret it, because my kids have grown up strong and I have a great relationship with them. I'm just incredibly thankful that we've had a little bit of a opportunity to get back together again and to make some more music, which is, for me, is a real blessing.
John, Matt and Lou, what was your reaction when Jerry left the band? And I wanted to also discuss phase 2 in the band's musical journey, and how did Robert Holmes come on board as the new vocalist, and what made you decide to sign to Virgin Records?
Well, I mean, you know, when I think it was a very sad time when Jerry left, because, you know, we'd grown up as a band together. You know, he had a strong writing partnership with Hallam, and so it was really difficult. I think phase 2 of the band I mean, I think we felt in the end when we signed to Virgin that it was probably, you know, well, this is, you know, maybe we deserve this now, because we've kind of we've worked hard and everything, and we thought you know, and Virgin came up with a pretty good deal and all the rest of it. Personally, I think I know you said some people like the second album a lot, and, you know, personally it was kind of a different structure, different way of recording, and perhaps we didn't have that thing about what we'd had with the first album, which was that we'd all got to know the songs so well. So I think the songs on the second album were kind of came together in a more fragmented way. And it was, if I'm absolutely honest, it was certainly for me, it was less fulfilling. But, you know, at the same time, I think there was some, you know, there were some good times in that. We signed to Virgin, as you say, you know, which wasn't all bad, because we could sort of pay ourselves a little bit of money for the first time. And we, you know, we still went out and did a lot of gigs, and played with a lot of different bands and a lot of different people around the country and in Europe as well. So I think it's difficult to compare the two, because they're both very different, but I think we've naturally gravitated, you know, hence what we've done in the last couple of years, culminating with these gigs. We've naturally gravitated back towards the original band, because I think it's, I think probably the relationships have been stronger. If I'm honest, I think the songs have been better. And I think the whole experience, going back to the beginning, and then subsequently all getting back together again, you know, starting about 18 months ago, has been a lot more enjoyable. And at the end of the day, you know, I think that's why we wanted to do it, because we wanted to go and enjoy ourselves again, get together again, play the songs that we really loved again. And now, you know, we've been fortunate enough to be able to come up with a whole stack of new material, which I think is really, really strong. So, you know, you go through what you do, don't you? You learn things in life, you have different experiences, and, you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But I don't think I'd probably change anything. You know, it's just the way it happened, and you can't change anything anyway. So you go with what you've learned. And all experiences are experiences. Some are better than others, but they're still all experiences. And I'm so glad, as Jerry said, that we've had the opportunity to get together again. And you know, a lot of the old magic has still been there, and that's been brilliant. That's been brilliant, really positive, a really great experience, and something I wouldn't have missed for the world.
Hear, hear. Well said, Matt. Yeah.
Same question to John and Lou, really. What was your gut feeling at the time when Jerry decided to leave the band? And also a bit about the second album, Tales of the Expected, the recording sessions and the exposure, because you played on the Whistle Test and the Tube again. How do you look back at that experience?
They were part of the first. They were part of the first album. The Whistle.
We didn't play the Whistle Test and the Tube again.
No, the Whistle Test was with the original band.
And so was the Tube, yeah.
So yeah, the Tube, yeah.
We played the Oxford Road show, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah. Well, I just have nothing to add to what you said, Matt. Really, that was, yeah, a good summary of the situation to me.
I think there was and for me there was like well, we've spent 5 years getting this far, you know. Please let's try and do something. And Rob was a friend of mine, and he played in a great band in Hull called Poor Howard, and it seemed like a good fit. at the time. It was like, well, we need somebody to take. We either all go, okay, that's it, put the stuff back in the case, lock it up, and go home, or you try and move it forward. And we tried to move it forward, and yeah, I think we're all in agreement that it just didn't have the same. Didn't have the same spark for us. It was difficult for Rob. He was thrown into it, and we'd had 4 years to build a setup of there's only like 12 songs or 13 songs, and he had to come up with 10 in 6 months that we then had to go and record for Virgin in some spanking studios in London with producers and all the rest of it. Enormous amount of pressure, and it didn't work really. I mean, it is interesting for me that it is, like you do come across a lot of people who go, that's a really good album. I don't have anything but bad memories from it at all. I found the whole recording process very what we had before as a band was that whole idea that we were a unit, and what the second album was about, it was about breaking that unit apart and taking the individuals and putting them in, spending weeks doing drum tracks that you then came to do the guitar on, and it was like, well, it was nothing like what I'd got for it, so you're constantly on your back foot having to relearn stuff all the time. And I think it was unfortunate. I think Rob probably felt a huge amount of pressure, but at the end of the day, I reached the end of the line with it. By the Blue Caravan single, that was enough for me. I just couldn't.
I think the other thing was as well, James, is that when you sign to a major label, I mean, you kind of lose some control in a way, and you get molded a bit. So straight away, and again, it's hindsight. Straight away, you're put in to a very expensive recording studio, and as John said, the way of recording is and the time taken. It's almost like, oh, this is how it is. This is how it is now. Was completely different to what we'd done in Hull when we recorded the first album. Completely different. And you get an up and coming, producer name, and the record company. They sign you because they like the music, but they also sees the potential of molding it their way. And you have to remember at that time, the hit music was Culture Club, Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet. I'm not saying that Virgin wanted us to necessarily turn us into one, another band like that, but there was a certain thing about being very glossy, being very polished in the studio, and I think we lost a lot of the rawness and the the excitement, perhaps, the grittiness of the early stuff, because and you get sucked into it. I mean, you get down to this big. I think the recording studio was called, it was called Park Gates in Sussex, and I think it was owned or partially owned by Paul McCartney. And it's like, you think, at that time you're in your 20s or whatever, you're, oh yeah, great, we're going into, and you get sucked along with it. And you come out, I think we came out with something irrespective of, partially to do with the lineup, but also to do with the people who were put around us.
Yeah.
You don't have them, you don't necessarily have all the nous that you have when you're later in life. And, people start to tell you that you're great and we'll put you in this great big studio and you'll have these snazzy people around you, and that thing, we didn't have the discipline, so we started working, I think, on that album, we start on a Monday morning at 10 o'clock next day, because you stayed up so late, playing it would be 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And it got to that thing where you were starting at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and stuff like that. And, you know, I mean, we're a lot older now. We wouldn't dream of working like that now. You know, I mean, it would just be ridiculous. And actually, I think because things have changed, you know, and recording techniques have changed, and what John was saying, you know, people can have a go now. You don't even need a recording studio. But that was the 80s. That was the early 80s. And everything was, for me, when you look back on it, was almost at its most indulgent. You know, and we sort of got sucked into a bit of that, I think.
It's a very interesting point that Matt's made, but it was actually right on the cusp, on the transition between analog recording and digital recording.
It was.
All our original recordings were done on 2-inch tape machine on an analog desk. And that's what we did it, how we did it with drop-ins and all the rest of it. This was a burgeoning new technology with digital synthesizers, Fairlights, and this whole new approach that was being pushed and pioneered by the major record companies and a set of producers and engineers who were dabbling for the first time with all this new technology. And in fact, it was really detrimental to the way that we had to record, because it wasn't our style of recording at all. I just remember them spending hours and hours and hours with a Fairlight trying to program some fucking thing that just had no consequence whatsoever.
And you're right, John, they didn't really know how. They didn't really.
No, they were using us as like guinea pigs for it. You know, they got the budget. We were paying all that advance that Virgin gave us. They got it back through their recording studios. You like a guinea pig, you know, to try out their new techniques, and then their up and coming producers. I don't know what was the guy's name? Howard Gray. Whatever happened to him?
Yeah.
I don't know. He's probably quite famous now. I don't know.
But you see, he'd worked with artists previous to us. He'd worked with artists like Green Garside, Scrittipaliti, and Grace Jones, and people like that. And if you think about that music, you know, it's. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's very, very, very produced.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
you know, and. Is that to the detriment of the actual songs? I don't know, but I think it was for us.
There was a whole new style of pop music. Pop music was being completely reinvented in the early 80s with the, you know, the culture clubs and the Duran Durans, and what Matt was saying, you know, there's all that kind of like gloss was more important, and
image.
It just didn't sit well with us. Really.
You can see obviously we've got into our image a great deal since the way we look tonight. Which,
yeah.
But yeah, and because that album actually came out, James, that album came out on vinyl and on CD.
Yeah.
So that, as John says, because it was that period of transition.
The band decided to split in 1986, and I briefly wanted you to summarize and talk about some of your musical experiences since the band split up. I know Lou and Hallam went on to form the Planet Wilson. Can you just talk? I know it's difficult because there's this kind of 30-year gap of you reforming, but what kind of musical things have you been doing post the Red Guitars?
Well, I'll say something about Planet Wilson. I can't remember how much longer it was. Hal and I, we all went off to do different things. And after a period of time, I can't remember how it happened, but Hal had he had a 4-track TIAC recording desk where you put a cassette in, you could record 4 tracks on the cassette, and he'd recorded some demos on there and he brought them around. So do you fancy having a play through them? And wow, yeah, they were great. So that led to the Planet Wilson taking shape. We got a mutual friend, a great drummer, a guy called Grant Ardis, who'd played, I think he played some percussion, didn't he, on the first album as well. He was a good guy. So there was the three of us, and we persuaded Virgin to keep us on for an album. So we got very small advance, but we went and bought some recording equipment with it. And yeah, we did go into the studio and record that first album with Steve Nye, which was great. It was good. Virgin put nothing into it whatsoever. I don't think they ever really intended to do anything with it, and they dropped us afterwards. But we did, and we recorded the album, and it was good. But when they did drop us after that, we had the recording. Well, it was a really old technology now. It was a 16-track analog recording, and really kind of old technology. But it was good enough for us to record an album, an independent album, which is what we did, and we had a great time recording that. We just took our time over it and had a lot of fun doing it, but it was just a hard slog. After a while, we didn't really have anybody working for us, getting gigs, sending records out to people in those cardboard covers. It was just hard. And after a few years of doing that, I can't remember, we decided to go separate ways. We got in another band after that, me and Hal. We've always played in a band, up until he went back to Cape Town. We always did play in a band together. We had at least one, possibly two other bands post Planet Wilson that we just did a few gigs. We just did some gigs with. But yeah, it became to a point where it was just really hard work. Hard to get gigs, hard to get people to gigs. But we did some great recordings, and we did have some good times. When we got back together again, I remember how much fun we had actually working together on the, just literally on the music. Yeah.
Same question to you all. We'll start with Jerry. What were your musical endeavours post the Red Guitars?
I released a single called Petals and Ashes, recorded it at Fairview with Roy Neve, the guy who engineered and co-produced the album. And I used the kind of Hull wrecking crew, which was like Danny Wood and Dave Greaves, who sadly died recently, on guitar, and I forget the bass player's name. What can anybody remember?
Was it Bernie Dolman?
Andy Shillito?
No,
Bernie Dolman, was it?
Bernie, yeah.
Bernie Dolman.
Yeah, Bernie Dolman. So recorded that, and it was released, and was a kind of okay. Then but by that stage I'd moved to Brighton. I had a band working with a Hull musician called Rory Cameron, and we rehearsed a lot. We recorded some demos up in Manchester, and we played one gig, I think, but that never really happened. And then gradually it just trailed off, and I more or less stopped performing and playing until last year.
Same question to Matt and John. Just wanted to find out musical projects or bands you've been in post.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was very hard for me because I didn't have the talent to kind of take anything forward by myself. So it was a bit of a devastating time. I was very sad about it and a bit of a loss knowing what to do. But a local band called Niam, who were signed to, what were they? A Beggars Banquet? Yeah.
4AD, yeah.
4AD.
Yeah.
Asked me to play with them, and that I did on the understanding that we would do a single, and if that didn't do anything, I would call it. And we did a single, and it was good actually. They were a good band, but you know, it's hard. The business had changed, and nobody wanted. I don't know. It's difficult. I took it to Virgin, to Simon Draper, who'd been the A&R guy, and he was very. It was obvious they weren't interested, so I just packed it in and moved to the other side and started working in studios and recording other bands. So I just became an engineer really, and worked in local studios. Eventually set up my own mobile recording studio, and became very, very adept at recording brass bands. It's a very difficult thing to do well, but yeah, you've got a brass band, I'm your man. Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed it. I mean, you know, looking back at my life as a 70-year-old man now, good technology is responsible for it. That one song, you know, if that song hadn't have happened, the Red Guitars would never have happened without good technology. Not in the same way that we did. It was all on the back of that one song. And my entire working career and trajectory afterwards was totally dependent on the fact that that song was picked up by John Peel, and we went on to do it. I spent the next 35, 40 years working in recording studios, buying and selling microphones, recording choirs, brass bands, jazz bands, you know, playing. I played with Hallam and Matt in a little R&B band for a while, the Fabulous Ducks, just for fun.
And then,
But yeah, music, you know, that song enabled me to follow some kind of career in music. Never made any money, but fortunately I was married to a wonderful lady who was a teacher who just kept the whole boat floating, you know, and so yeah, that was it really.
And then finally, Matt, I wanted to ask, post Red Guitars, what you've been up to.
I came to my senses, James, and went to work for a bank for 25 years.
It's true.
I consider that to be my proper career. No, I did. I've scarce, until we got back playing, you know, first, whatever it was, a year, 18 months ago, I'd scarcely, you know, hit a drum in anger. So I didn't really play very much at all. I went into the world of big business, and did it for a long time, a lot longer than I thought I would. And you know, it was okay. It paid the bills, but it also made me. By the time I left it, which was about 6 years ago, you know, it's kind of. Am I glad I did it? I'm sort of glad I did it, but I don't miss it. I don't miss it for one day, you know. So we are where we are, and I think we've all gone off. We've all done lots of different stuff over the last 35, 40 years, but it's kind of neat that it's come back.
Yeah. I should say that all this time as well, Hal's carried on in playing music. He moved back to Cape Town. And he says the music business is pretty conservative there, and he plays in a blues band. He gigs, loads of gigs. So I think he's gigged all the way through. And he's music teacher, teaches music. That's what he's done to keep himself afloat.
And he's picked up, you know, whilst I've hardly picked up a drumstick, Hallam's never put down.
I've carried on playing in different bands over the years. I've always played. Yeah, I've got a few things on the go.
Jerry, let's come on to the reformation of the group. You briefly reformed on 2 occasions. Who was responsible for the decision to reform the band and go out on a short UK tour, which took place earlier this year?
Steve Homer. He works at a company called AEG Presents. We're a promotions company, one of the bigger ones in the world, I believe. And he emailed me and said, did we fancy doing some shows? So I got in touch with everybody, and the answer was yes. So really, it's all down to Steve.
I wanted to also ask the challenges involved, because a couple of you, Matt, for instance, said you've not played musically for a long time. So I wanted to ask about the rehearsal process, how long that took before you decided to go out on the road, and did you gel almost instantly, or did it take some time to
I think we did. I think we gelled pretty quickly, but I think what we did was we've probably spent a year or more, because it was we weren't getting together every week, so there were big periods in between. And of course, with Hallam being in South Africa, that presented another problem because we didn't actually get him over here until about 2 or 3 weeks before we played the gigs. So I think we did gel pretty quickly. Yeah, I think we did. But I think we were quite cautious, quite careful, because we wanted to make sure, we could play again. So we weren't going to get together and say, right, in a month, we're going to start doing some gigs. And as Jerry said, AEG and Steve Homer sort of planned those with us and for us. But actually, I think the culmination of it, James, was that most people who came to see us, who'd seen us 40 years ago, said we were actually probably a much tighter and a much better performing unit than we were, 40 years ago. And I think that was because we worked bloody hard, actually. We worked bloody hard rehearsing.
Yeah, we did.
And I think it paid off.
Yeah, I think we got a really good, my feeling was that we just gelled straight away. We got together again. It was just like the old times. It felt like nobody had changed.
You are
40 years older. It just was amazing. It was just amazing. Yeah. But also, as Matt's already said, but the implication of this was big in my mind. The whole tour was advertised and sold out before we'd got together with Hal.
Yeah.
It was completely nailed on, advertised, everything was done, except that we hadn't actually had a rehearsal together with Hal till 3 weeks before, 2 to 3 weeks before we went out on tour. But we did do some really good intensive rehearsals. First of all, we had a few days in Brid, and the very first day, John you'd organised it in a studio in Brid. I couldn't make the first day. The second day I came along, there was you guys all there in this little room. And honestly, I walked in the room and it was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. I was like, right, let's start by turning it down.
Yeah.
And we can play them. And then from then on, we started rehearsing in O'Reilly's in Hull, which is a venue in Hull. And it was just great, on a great big stage with a great sound. You're just rehearsing in a fantastic circumstance where you can hear everything really clearly. And we just did intensive rehearsals for like 3 days solid, little blocks of 3 days every month or two. And then Zoom meetings in between to work out parts, different groups of us, little breakout groups for having Zoom meetings to work out what we were going to do. And apart from, in the end, when Hal came over, one song he'd learnt in a different key than the four of us. We just only one song, everything else just slotted straight into place, didn't it?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. Good technology. The whole. I used to play with an AC30 just there, turned on full. That's why I'm completely deaf in one ear, and I couldn't hear anything in those early, I can remember going into the studio after we'd been playing live for 2 years, and Jerry put the vocal down to a track, and I went, fucking hell, is that what it's about? I had no idea, It was like, you just know. Back in the day, PAs were absolutely crap. Nobody could hear anything. Monitors were non-existent. Everybody just turned. You had to play to the drums, really. You standing there in front of a drum kit that's just clattering away. You've got to keep turning up, and the balancing and the tuning that we used to have.
There were no tuners. We were all electronic tuners, so we were
huddle behind and put my ear on the guitar so I could actually hear it, and then we'd all agree that was close enough, and we'd go out. And so the technology that is around now, we got a load of in-ear monitors and the guitars and the sounds that we were able to get were just superb compared to what we had back in the day. I mean, certain bands did it. They were great. They were great live back in the day, and they managed it. But it was always a struggle for me. I can remember playing in Hamburg one night when I walked on stage, flicked my amp on. There was a loud bang and a flash, and it was completely dead. So I just mimed the whole gig, and no one noticed.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was just this wall of mud, that just went out there. So yeah, it was joyful. And the other fantastic thing that we had going for us that we hadn't got is Jerry had kept the 2-inch multi-tracks from all our original recordings. So I was able to sit and put them all in Logic and listen through and go, oh my God, listen to what Hal does there. Oh, that's brilliant, that bit there. Lou's bit here is fabulous. So we were able to completely reconstruct those songs because our memories are shot. I can't even remember, I mean, there are gigs that everybody talks about that I don't think I was there.
That was strange because all our memories were so different. We all thought we all had really clear memories, but they were all different.
Yeah, that's
weren't
right.
They?
Yeah, totally
I did think. I mean, those songs were pretty entrenched. I could remember the bass lines. When I heard the isolated basses, they weren't all exactly right, but they were close. Whereas other things that I've played since then, and anything from any other album, I can't remember. I can't remember at all. They came back really relatively easily. Yeah.
I think without those 2-inch multi-tracks, it would have been a very different story. We would have had a real job in being able to prepare ourselves for Hallam coming over to do it. We were able to reconstruct the songs from stems, the original things that we played 40 years before. So that was an absolutely fantastic thing, just a brilliant thing to have.
You probably mentioned Jerry Allen and Doug as well at this
time.
We got an old mate to come and play a bit of guitar because Hallam played so many different and interesting parts on the original recordings. That it was handy to have a third guitarist. And Doug came in and we were able to use some samples from the original recordings and fly them in live, which was really great. Doug, having turned up to shoot some film of the band, was kind of ended up joining us.
Yeah, it was great fun as well. Really good.
Coming towards the end of the interview, I don't really like to call it an interview, a conversation, but what shone through is this delight that you're all back together and this fondness for the original set of songs. But I'd like to ask you all to summarize your thoughts and feelings from the recent reunion tour. Do you have any favorite moments or memories? And can you describe your interaction with the audience and the fans that you met throughout the tour?
I think one of the best words that I think I've heard used was, it was joyful.
Yeah,
it was joyful. We met with a lot of old friends. We met a lot of new people. I think, you know, obviously playing at the 100 Club in London and selling that out was a great experience, I thought. Hull as well, you know, which was sold out for different reasons, obviously. And it was joyful, yeah, it was great. We had a wonderful,
I think if you look,
time.
Sorry. Yeah, if you look at the photos, we've now got loads of photographs. We had hardly any photographs of the band before this reunion tour, nothing, you know. But now we've got absolutely loads of great photographs, and they, you know, you can see from the photographs that the fun we were having, the joyfulness, it just shines out. Well, all good memories, the whole tour.
What about yourself, Jerry and John?
Same for me.
I have two standout memories, I think. One was in Manchester. A woman, I had a conversation with a woman afterwards who had intended to go and see the band back in 1984 when we played in Middlesbrough, but had been prevented from doing so because her mother wouldn't let her. 40 years later, she came to Manchester to the gig, and she was very, very pleased that she'd been able to tick that box. And the other memory I have is I had some problems with my microphone at the 100 Club in London. It was cutting out a bit, and at one point during Good Technology, I did the dreadful thing of not singing a line and allowing the audience to sing it for me, and they obliged, and it was a bit gruesome, but it was felt kind of like being a proper rock star.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Also, just mention the photographs. It's Lou's partner Richard Duffy Howard took a lot of photographs, and they're fantastic. So we owe him.
Yeah.
Pass it on. Yeah.
I love the photograph where there's an artwork of you all in your youth and you're pictured.
Oh yeah.
But where is
Yeah.
that artwork? Because it's very impressive.
Yeah. It's in Hull. It's on Columbus Street. A local artist called Ed Uliart was commissioned by a guy to paint the end of a like Belfast style mural, you know, on the end of a block of houses, and commissioned to and the guy who commissioned it stipulated the bands that he wanted in it. So it has Mick Ronson, it has Roland, it has Paul Eaton, the House Martins, it has the Red Guitars. And it has an all-girl band that I from the 60s that I don't even know what they're called. They look like the Go-Go's.
Called Mandy and the Girlfriends.
Oh, what are they called? Mandy and the Girlfriends. Fabulous name. You know?
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great mural, and so we were able. Again, it was just perfect timing. It just all happened at the same time. We were able to go and do that. You know, amazing, really.
And now the final question for tonight's Your Take. Open up to you all. Sadly, obviously, Hallam can't answer. I'd like to hear his thoughts as well. But what does the future hold for the band, the Red Guitars? Is there a plan to record a new album or arrange a follow-up tour?
Yeah, I think, well, we're probably all really excited about the new material. Matt's already spoken about it. But we have got we've had Hal came over recently for 3 weeks. We had 3 weeks rehearsing, well, a great deal of time working on the new songs. So they're kind of ready to start recording, really. If Hal was here now, we would get them done, we would get started, wouldn't we? We're ready to go.
I mean, it's very exciting. I don't know, you know, I mean, it's like the world's changed. It's, you know, we can, you know, I appreciate that, you know, our doing a one-off tour like we did will bring people out, but you can't keep doing that. You have to have some material to back it up. You have to do something. It's 40 years next June since the release of Good Technology. So I've been busy, well, we've all been busy, but me particularly, doing a very extensive rework of the song, which is going to be released on the same day, 40 years on from that. And it's shaping up to be really, really exciting, really good. So that's a little teaser there. But the new material, I think it's fabulous. You know, it's like it has the same. I have the same feel about it that I had about the original band. You know, it was like I felt immensely proud of being part of that band. That you know, there were songs in the original lineup. I thought "Fact" was an astonishing song. I thought Steel Town was a great song. Marimba Jive, great song. They keep going, you know, you kind of, and I'm so proud of them. I just, you know, and they're not, you know, I was part of it, but, you know, Jerry and Hal wrote those songs, but I feel the same way about the new material as I felt about the old stuff. So for me, real excited, yeah.
And what about yourself, Jerry?
Well, I also feel very excited about the new material. I don't think it's quite as far along the road as maybe has been suggested, in the sense. Well, I haven't finished the lyrics.
Hey.
I really value the opportunity to write this set of lyrics, which I hope will reflect all of the things we've been talking about this evening, about this sense of distance and perspective between then and now. And I'm hoping that we can come up with some really funky arrangements and some really, you know, great kind of intros, some great some great middles, you know, like really do justice to the songs. And then we're going to record them, and if they turn out anywhere near as good as we all hope they will, that will be fantastic. And whatever happens after that, who knows? Maybe they also will be slow to fade. Let's hope so.
Yeah.
The end chapter for tonight's interview, but not the end chapter for the Red Guitars. I'm really looking forward to hearing the new material on Speak Volumes. I'm sure all the fans and followers are equally excited after all this time. I wanted to end with, I think these ones are out of, I don't think you can get hold of them now, can you? That's
very rare.
Yeah, and this one, which is the BBC sessions, which I've seen on eBay a few times, and the one you're not so keen on. So yeah, I think they're great. The track we haven't mentioned, I absolutely adore, Paris, France. I think you crank that one up loud. It's just a great rock song. Great lyrics.
Yeah.
I wanted to end to
by Paul O'Brien, who's now a very celebrated poet in his, you know, always was a poet. Back in the day, Sean and I edited a poetry magazine called the Stone Ferry Review, and we published quite a number of well-known poets in the three editions of that we put out. So yeah, I know Sean would like to come and see us play, but he couldn't make it to the last tour, so we kind of feel obliged to try and get a gig up in Newcastle so that he can and, maybe timbales with a rose
to finish with. I wanted to mention a particular name of a person who I know would be over the moon if I say his name, because he's been a huge fan of yours for many years, and he introduced me to you, and he came to the Birmingham gig that you did on the tour. His name's Steve Buck, and he was the one, I think I was 22 at the time, he handed me this cassette tape with Slow to Fade on it, and I remember putting it on in the car and was just blown away by it, but blown away for a number of reasons. The great rhythm section with Matt on the drums, John on rhythm, and your bass sounds so powerful, that bass, incredible bass sounds, and Jerry's unique vocals, and Hallam, as you said, just that distinctive sound. And I love seeing him play that Gibson on the recent tour. I was a little bit jealous of that Gibson, and yeah, I'm a huge Gibson. Chuck Berry's my hero, so Gibson every time. Finally, thank you all, because you always come across as such warm, nice people and excellent musicians as well. And thank you for your time, and I hope you've got something out of this. I wanted it we said an hour, and it's hard to keep it to an hour because you've got so much to talk about and reminisce about, and there's so much to cover. But I'll finish up with 3 favourite bands of the 80s. Prefab Sprout were one who I think are tremendous. Talk, but I put yourselves up there, Red Guitars, because I always thought those 3 bands, you're always doing things that were different, unique, and pushing the envelope. And for me, you were the best 3 bands of the 1980s.
Oh, bless.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Joe.
Very kind of you to say. Thank you.
That selection.
I wish you all the very best. How do we find out more about Red Guitars?
Well, over to Lou.
Okay, so we've actually got 2 websites at the moment. We've got the website that Jerry set up and has been running all this time, which is redguitars.co.uk. And recently I've set up a kind of a new website blog site, so we're all adding stories to that. So for kind of interactive things that are going on, that's red-guitars.com, and then there's links on there to the usual Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So follow us on all those things, and you'll find out what's happening. Yeah.
And finally, Jerry Kidd, Matt Higgins, Lou Howard, Hallam Lewis, wherever he might be, and John Rowley, Red Guitars. Thank you for this evening. And I wait in great anticipation for the new recordings.
Great.
Cheers. Thanks, James. Good to talk to
Thank you
you.
very much.
And we'll see you all at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah.
Oh,
See you
yeah.
tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah. See you tomorrow. Brilliant.
Okay, take care.
Go to the dance
See you then.
for, is it 5 o'clock?
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.